Hi friends, for today's assignment we are going to log into Delta Math and I want you guys to complete 6 questions of finding the coordinate on the unit circle. So this is a topic that we did before we were off, so we're going to jump right back in and start reviewing some of the topics before we move on. So what I would like you to do, I'm going to go through 2 questions with you. So if you want to follow through and actually take notes, you absolutely can. But your assignment for today is actually completing these 6 questions. So you're going to log into Delta Math and click on the assignment. I'm going to do the first few with you. They are going to be different than yours, but you could just kind of see and get an idea of how you're going to do these. So they're telling me the point P, which is 2/5 comma y, lies on the unit circle below. What is the value of y in simplest form? The first thing I like to do is draw myself my own sketch, and they're showing me that point P is in quadrant 1. So if I have an angle in quadrant 1, in order to draw the reference angle, I always drop it down to my x-axis. And I make myself a nice right little triangle. And this is my reference angle that I'm using. So by them telling me that this is the point 2/5 comma y, that is their way of giving me my x and y values of this point. What that means in my triangle, if I'm plotting an x value, well, if here's my point, if I'm plotting my x value, this distance here is my x value. So that distance there is 2/5. Again, I'm plotting this point, so that means this distance going up is going to be my y value. I don't know what that value is, so I'm going to label that as y. Now, because they tell me that this is on the unit circle, whenever you see that phrase on the unit circle, that tells you that the radius of the circle is 1. So I really, to add to this image, which you don't have to do when you do this, but I just want to give you a visual. When you have this circle here and it's passing through that point, this is really what the picture looks like. So my radius that it's talking about is this orange piece here. And because this is the unit circle, my radius there is 1. I'm just going to erase this circle just so it's not too busy on this page for me to look at. Now, they would like me to find the value of y. I have a right triangle. I know 2 of the sides. I need to find that third side. In order to do that, we need to use Pythagorean theorem. Pythagorean theorem is a squared plus b squared equals c squared. When we use Pythagorean theorem, the only thing that matters where it goes is your hypotenuse. So because I know this hypotenuse is 1, I'm going to put that in as c, and I need to square that. The other 2 sides, it does not matter if they're a or b, so just pick your preference. I'm going to do 2/5 squared plus this really is my y value squared. Once we set this up, I now need to actually solve for y. So I do need to take this 2/5, and at this point you should be using your calculators. I'm taking 2/5 and squaring it. You could leave it either in fractions or decimal. It does not bother me. So I'm going to leave these as fractions. So if I square 2, I get 4. If I square 5, I get 25. Plus y squared equals 1. I now still need to solve for y squared, so get everything to the other side. I'm going to subtract 4 over 25, so 1 minus that value. And subtract it on this side. I get that y squared is equal to 21 over 25. Again, I want to get y by itself, not y squared, so I do need to take the square root. This and this cancels out. So I'm left with y is equal. Well, I can't take the square root of 21. That's going to give me an irrational number. So I'm going to leave that under my square root house and leave that as a 21. And the square root of 25 is 5. So I'm going to simplify it as much as I can. Now remember, when we take the square root, we need to remember plus and minus when you yourself draw in that square root. And the reason why this is important here is because depending on what quadrant it is, this y value could be positive or negative. In this case, my y value, or this point that it is going up in a positive direction. So this y value is going to be positive radical 21 over 5. So once you complete that work, you're going to go over here and you're going to actually submit it. You don't need to put the positive if it is positive. I'm going to do radical and then 21 and then get out of underneath that radical and then do divided by 5. Submit your answer. Are you sure? Yes. And you need to do 6 of these. So you need to, on the top left-hand corner, you could see that it's counting. I have 1 of 6 correct. It does show you the complete answer, and if you get it wrong, it will go through and show you what you did wrong. So I'm going to do one more question with you. I'm going to try to find one that is in another quadrant. So let's see. They all seem to be in that quadrant. There we go. So here is our next example we are going to try. Point P is x radical negative 2/3, and it lies in the quadrant unit circle shown below, which is in quadrant 3 in this case. What is the value of x in simplest form? Again, my first step, I like to draw my axes and sketch out what this triangle is going to look like in this quadrant. I know that I'm looking for this x value and that this y value is negative radical 3/2. Again, it's on the unit circle. Since they give you that phrase on the unit circle, your radius of the circle, or your hypotenuse in this case, is going to be 1. Now, I'm looking for that x value, so I'm going to use Pythagorean theorem. Again, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. The important thing is finding your hypotenuse first and putting that as your c squared. So 1 squared, x squared, which is what I'm solving for, negative radical 3/2 squared. Now, notice I put that in parentheses. When you type that negative radical 3/2 squared into your calculator, please make sure that you are putting that in parentheses. Otherwise, it's going to give you a different answer. We do know when we square something, I'm multiplying it by itself. So a negative and a negative should give me a positive. If you got a negative on something like this, then you know that you might have typed something in wrong. I would check for parentheses. So if I do negative radical 3/2 squared, I'm going to end up with 3/4 equals 1 squared is just 1. So 1 minus 3/4 is going to give me 1/4. So I get x squared equals 1/4. Again, I don't want x squared, I want just x, so I am going to take the square root on both sides. This and this cancels out. And if I take the square root of 1/4, I get 1/2. So x equals 1/2. Most important thing, please remember the plus or minus. Again, go back to your picture. In this case, when I'm plotting this point, my x value is going in the negative direction. So although x is equal to 1/2, x is also equal to negative 1/2. And because I'm going in that negative direction, I need to know that x is equal to that negative 1/2 in this question. If I was in another quadrant, let's say quadrant 1 or quadrant 4, then it would be a positive 1/2. But because they're telling you this is in quadrant 3 from this sketch, I know that it is a negative 1/2. So as my answer, the negative button is just the minus. And I'm going to do 1 divided by 2. You should be able to also put it in decimal form if you prefer to work with decimals. Submit my answer. Yes, and I see I get it correct. So along with doing these 6 questions, I would like you to find the discussion board on Canvas and just make a comment on there that you at least found it, maybe a happy face, whatever, just so I know that you found it. So these are the 2 things that are going to count for your attendance and your assignment for today, completing the 6 questions and just making a comment on the discussion board. If you have any questions, please write them on the discussion board or email me and I will be happy to get back to you.